Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.
Walter Stewart of Madison is a Democratic candidate in the 48th Assembly District. The primary is August 11th. Mr. Stewart, thanks for joining WisconsinEye. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve Walters. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I see a whole bunch of law books in your background, so give us the 30-second version of your bio quickly, please.
I can do so. I'm a graduate of the University of Wisconsin, where I went to law school. I practiced law in the Madison area for 37 years. I have my own law practice downtown where I employ people. I used to work in the legislature, both during and after law school. I live in the district, and my wife and I have been in our home for 30 years. So looking forward to an opportunity to take my skills to the legislature.
Have you specialized in any type of law, Mr. Stewart?
Yes, it's a civil law practice. We do family law, real estate, small business organizations, probate, and estate planning.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's move on to some important topics. There's a lot of them.
Sure.
What if tax collections do fall, as the governor has warned they might, by $2 billion in the next fiscal year, which starts Wednesday? If they fell by that amount, would you cut spending for major state programs, or would you raise revenues, which means, I guess, raise taxes?
Well, I know that tax revenue will fall, and I know that there are over 100 assembly bills dealing with tax revenue. So I think that we need to take a careful look at those bills, because $2 billion would be a very big hit to the Wisconsin economy. I think that we need to take a careful look at the tax bills and make sure that the burden of those tax bills do not fall disproportionately on people who are not able to bear that burden. It's important that any taxes be right taxes.
Well, would you be willing to raise taxes if we did get that very significant drop-off in tax collections?
I think that you will have to. I think the answer is yes to that. Cutting, as desirable as some people would like to make that be, I think cutting would cut disproportionately on the poor and people who need the help.
Who should draw the next district lines for Congress, Senate, and the Assembly? Right now, as you're aware, the party in power does so, but the governor would like a People's Commission to draw new district lines and then forward it to the Capitol to be enacted into law. Who's right?
I think that the governor is right on that, and let me explain. I think the current system is too expensive and too litigious. I like the way they do it in Iowa, but I understand that legislative leadership wants to preserve that prerogative. I say you have a nonpartisan commission to draw the maps so that the legislative leadership knows what a nonpartisan map looks like.
We know a lot more about police conduct than we did 2 months ago. My question is, do we need statewide standards for how police treat those in custody? Do we, for example, banning chokeholds, banning no-knock warrants, keeping a database of officers who are prone to violence? That's been recommended by the governor. Good idea?
Your question, though, asks about people, how are people treated once they are in custody? And reality, it's been very well known for decades how police treat people who are in custody. Anybody who studied the civil rights history will know about that. But I think that body cameras would be a good idea in jails to minimize the risk of abuse. I also find that the jails tend to become mental health hospitals. So we may need more mental health professionals and more mental health services to help those people who find themselves in jails.
What about the governor's call for a special session to ban things like chokeholds, et cetera? Would you support that?
I do think that there changes are necessary in policing practices. I think that a special session probably would not accomplish very much because we know what the legislative leadership did the last time the governor called a special session.
Okay. 2 questions on property tax. Well, Wisconsin has some of the highest property taxes in the nation, which is why school districts and local governments have to deal with property tax limits and caps. Schools and governments can exceed the caps through referendums if they need more money for services. If elected, would you vote to keep those property tax caps or eliminate them?
The short answer is keep, but the better answer was reflected in the last legislative budget, when the legislature raised the cap. So I think that you have to take a look at adjusting the cap in light of how realistic is it for local governments and school districts to rely upon the property tax. Also, school districts seem to be pretty successful at passing referenda when they need the money, which is the way which the people say what the people want the money raised and spent for.
Thank you. Second question on property taxes. Counties and municipalities rely on the property tax to fund more than 40% of the cost of services they provide. That 40% is seventh highest in the nation, 10 percentage points higher than any other Midwest state. One reason they rely on the property tax is the lack of alternative revenue options. Is it time for alternative revenue options? For example, broadening the sales tax to now exempt products and services? Should we consider broadening the sales tax?
I think that we should consider taking a careful look at the state's shared revenue formula and asking how that may need to be adjusted to meet the needs of the municipalities and school districts. There will be needs caused by COVID-19 that we don't imagine yet. And so we need to take a careful look at what are the problems that need to be addressed and how can shared revenue help. I'm very careful on that subject of sales tax. Sales tax tends to be fairly regressive, like the property tax, and we may be substituting one regressive tax for another.
You've been watching, we've all been watching the stalemate over how to pay for highways, which has existed for 4-6 years. My question is on the fuel tax. 30.9 cents a gallon. It hasn't been raised in more than 10 years. Is it time to raise the gas tax, Walt?
I think it's time to go back to indexing the gas tax, one. But secondly, I think it's also time that we may need to look at alternative revenues, since I think that gasoline and fossil fuels will become obsolete. So yes, I think that we should we should go back to indexing, but we may need to consider other sources of revenue because the bridges and roads do need a lot of attention.
Two COVID-19 questions. The first one, as an attorney, you'll have an opinion on this. Should businesses that follow all prescribed COVID-19 practices and recommendations be immune from frivolous lawsuits?
Well, the law already has a provision for dealing with frivolous lawsuits. So I think that we can get past that issue. Before I would give an opinion on legislation, I'd have to read the legislation. Obviously, you're talking about a pretty important exemption from liability. I also think it's inherently unfair to penalize a business that tries to follow state standards, that tries to follow industry standards. On the other hand, if a person is injured and has a claim, that's why we have courts.
Well, the other COVID question, this pandemic, as you're aware, has hit our economy and the healthcare providers the state relies on especially hard. Recessions cause less revenue, as we've discussed, for the state, and more demands for safety net programs like Medicaid. Should the legislature in the next budget, which you'd be voting on if you're elected to the assembly, make investing in hospitals a greater priority?
I know that hospitals, especially the rural hospitals, had taken quite a hit due to COVID-19, and even the local hospitals here in Madison have had to forego certain surgeries and certain revenue. I would prefer, however, to invest more in people. And I would have three ideas. One is we saw what happened when we ran short of personal protection equipment. That was unsatisfactory. Secondly, I think that we need to encourage more people to go into nursing. We already have a nursing shortage. We're going to need nurses even more. And the third is we need to expand medical assistance, increase the availability of healthcare services so people can avoid hospitals or minimize their stay in hospitals.
Well, part of that debate includes the expansion of Medicaid, something the Republicans have refused to do. Do you support the expansion?
Yes, I support it to 200% of the federal poverty level.
Thank you. New subject. A study in 2015 found that out-of-state contractors were awarded $72 million in public works projects by local governments, a number that doubled to $146 million in 2018. The question, should bidding standards and requirements give preferences to Wisconsin companies when local governments authorize large public works projects?
I think that as much as possible, we need to provide jobs for the people who are living here. I understand the need for a fair and competitive bidding process, but I think part of that process ought to consider what happens to those jobs, what happens to that revenue. I'd like to keep that revenue in Wisconsin. I believe that there are plenty of well-qualified Wisconsin workers who can do the work. As
I interview candidates for the assembly from Madison, the plans to expand and relocate F-35s. This jet aircraft is an issue. Are you supportive of the plan to bring F-35As here?
Well, this last winter, I did sign the petition opposed to the F-35 planes. What I am more concerned about is the pollution PFAS, which is associated with the management of these planes. This is the water pollution problem. So although I understand the F-35 issue is important, I think that the PFAS issue poses a greater threat to the quality of life in Madison.
Okay. We've talked about a number of issues, but I might have missed some of the key, most important central issues to your campaign. Here's your opportunity to talk about them that we haven't touched on yet, sir.
Okay. Well, I think that one thing that distinguishes me from my opponents is my experience. As I said before, I have a business in Madison. I practice law. I've done so for 37 years. I represent individuals, families, small businesses, and nonprofits. I listen to their concerns. We try to craft solutions. Try to craft solutions to their problems. The second, and I think that that's the kind of quality that you would want in a legislator. Second, I'm very comfortable at working with people with whom I have a disagreement. That's my work. So we listen to people, we discuss, we negotiate, we compromise, we try to find a way to resolve our differences and move forward. And the third way is that I'm very comfortable working with people who are disagreeable. And those of us who have followed the legislature know there's no shortage of disagreeable in the legislature. I can look beyond those attitudes and keep my eye on what's important to the people in my district.
Is that what separates you from your opponents in the August 11 primary?
Yes, my experience.
Okay. Any other issues? Okay, go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
And I believe with that experience, I am fit for this job. I'm fit for the fight.
Okay. If there's no other issue, I want to thank Walt Stewart of Madison, who is the Democratic candidate in the 48th Assembly District. The primary election is August 11th. Mr. Stewart, WisconsinEye wants to thank you for your time.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.